the second day of August 2022. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. You call in at 709-589-4406. Back at nuclear. I think the best way to describe the nuclear industry is schizophrenic. Schizophrenic and genocidal, ecocidal. Turn that down for you. We'll jump right into it. So the biggest topic when it comes to nuclear is going to be Fukushima, which was multiple nuclear meltdowns that happened in Japan. And one of the problems with it is if you're from North America in particular, or anywhere else on the planet, but North America was the same as ground zero, because the winds blew straight across to North America. And the particles are so small that it's effortless for it to be carried to continents worldwide. And this is what we see, where the particulates from gas, oil, and coal are very large. They don't travel very far. 50 miles if on a good day, 100 miles exceptional day. The story about carbon dioxide is to lead you away from what's really going on, which is the nuclear industry. The emissions from nuclear power are astronomical. It's 100% emergency, it's catastrophic, and there's over 1,000 fuel pools worldwide hemorrhaging isotopes into the environment every 24 hours, because the fuel that is in the pools at fuel plants, or fuel pools at nuclear plants, are still splitting the atoms they would split to power homes. Those atoms now are released with no containment into the environment. And the numbers out of each fuel pool is catastrophic. It's catastrophic, and they have a very longevity into many millions of years. After Fukushima, multiple nuclear reactors had melted down. The public, possibly worldwide, will sicken over time. This model was France's model, based on 16 days of radioactive fallout, and there was a headline attached to it: "Save the whales, ban nuclear power." There's a reason I say that. I'll explain to you. Deteriorating plant, a single imagine this. Your power plant breaks down and it threatens mass extinction around the world. So they have you fixated on nuclear bombs. But nuclear bombs are over in 1/1,000,000th of a second. They're localized and they're devastating. Don't get me wrong, but they're localized. The radioactive fallout goes worldwide, but it's not like a nuclear meltdown. Nuclear meltdown, unfortunately, it never stops emitting into the environment, just like the fuel pools, constantly hemorrhaging radiation all day. So we have a poll for you tonight to help articulate this. Are 1,000 plus nuclear fuel pools, constant and radioactive emissions, an imminent threat to humanity? And there's only one answer to that. The answer is yes, it's an imminent threat. After Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, as you can imagine, the radioactive fallout is extraordinary. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't create plumes like this, and the plumes don't pulse energy at the speed, almost at the speed of light. It's just pure energy every second for millions of years. We are in real trouble. I'm begging you as a planet to address this honestly. This is your problem. This is a real problem. This is the root of the problem. So after Fukushima multiple nuclear reactors melted down, we launched expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, in the Pacific Ocean all the way to Alaska. And these expeditions lasted 4 to 5 months or longer each year without coming home on the ocean, looking for species to see if there was a noticeable effect on the species. And this is one of those expeditions, but we do this in this boat each year. Except for this year, this is the only year we haven't had an expedition. We're leaving Port Hardy. These were difficult, very difficult expeditions, believe you me. And what we discovered was staggering. What we discovered was that you can fill the beach up with people, but you wouldn't find the species that were there 11 years ago. They had disappeared. The species to your left, and what you're looking at there is just a fraction, and I'll show you a whole bunch of the species. To the left is a fraction of what you would expect to find in any tidal zone along the entire coastline of British Columbia. And Alaska, of course, all the way down into California. The species to your left are exterminated. We can quantify that assertion because we went back year after year and validated that the species didn't come back. They didn't come up from deeper, they didn't fill in the gap from both sides, they're exterminated. They've been exterminated, and this is true now for the entire Pacific. This is not an opinion, and it's not a conjecture. This is fact. And they're hiding, they're not acknowledging what I'm showing you. These are authentic before and after pictures. I don't understand how the world can say, well, you know, whatever, can't do nothing about it, and you got to go do something else. How can you switch off? How does that actually work? Because I can't. And I don't understand how anybody can. And the fact that they won't admit that this has happened, how are you supposed to have a conversation with people like that? If they're willing to do that, what else are they willing to do? The species to your left are exterminated. That was 11 years ago. This is what the beaches looked like. To the right is what they look like today, if you're lucky, with maybe 2 algae, kelp cabbage and common kelp left out of 700 kelps algae. The pictures to your left, you will never take those pictures again. It's an extinction event. And we bring you this warning, and it's a lot of work. We do this 5 days a week in the hopes that the world will come to its senses. Year after year after year after year after year after year. And so what we're going to do each night to keep the truth alive is we're going to cover the daily 24-hour news cycle. I hope you'll join us. That begins right away, right here, right now. Last night was the first night in over a decade that I didn't have nightmares. Last night was the first night in over a decade where I had good dreams, where I woke up shocked and understanding that this wasn't a normal sleep. Like, wait, what? For 11 years, we've been trying to explain to the population of the planet that is in so much danger, and the future and the species that we're supposed to protect as we are the stewards And those who join me regularly are the stewards of the planet, not the other people that claim they are, who speak lies and won't acknowledge the facts. Fukushima is not like eating a banana, it's not like walking in sunshine, it's not like flying on an airplane, it's not like sleeping next to somebody, it's not like climbing a mountain, it's not like 15 minutes in a kayak or 20 days in New York or eating peanut butter. It's very dangerous, it has serious adverse effects upon all the species and everything with replicating cells. It's catastrophic effects. And you can, from the pictures I showed you earlier, there's only one way you can describe it. That's an extinction level event. You can pretend it's not, but you're pretending. It means you're stupid. Because we went out there 6 years in a row and the species didn't repopulate the coastline anywhere. There's no oases anywhere. And we've listened to this lies now for 80 years. At what point are you going to use your voice, I wonder? After 93 days, because you don't use your voice, of massive radioactive fallout, no country worldwide would eat the Japanese food. Canada had lifted all restrictions after 93 days, after 3 months, and Japan had nowhere to ship the deadly, hideously radioactive food only to Canada, and they did. Now everybody in Canada is sick because of it. The food was banned not just from Fukushima prefecture, it was banned from 14 other prefectures by 55 countries. Not one country, not two countries, not three countries, not 10, not 20, not 30, not 40, but 50 countries. I'm sorry, 55. For over a decade. And these deceitful, dishonest, disingenuous creatures known as the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is it's a spin-off from a military-industrial complex known as United Nations. There's 195 militaries. It's the military-industrial complex. You were warned about the military-industrial complex. There it is. It's called the International Atomic Energy Agencies. And they're the authors for almost 80 years of this propaganda, along with all the media that has been captured worldwide. Last night, the story came out, radioactive water leak reported at Japan's Mihama nuclear power plant. This is Nuclear Engineering International. You would expect that to be where you would go to find the facts, right? Well, you're wrong. That's where you go to get propaganda. 7 tons of radioactive water, and he said there's no adverse side effects. And they destroy another island. You know that the nuclear industry destroyed all the paradises on the planet, the French Polynesian islands, the Christmas Island, the Marshall Islands. By the way, the Marshall Islands is over 1 million square kilometers of contamination. According to a recent 2019 study, is too radioactive to be habitable for 1 million square kilometers. Do you think that's going to go away anytime soon? Do you think that didn't migrate 1 billion kilometers? I think it stayed there. I wonder what that is I see up there. Is that floating in the water? Surely people are not fishing alongside a nuclear power plant, are they? These are disease factories, by the way. Alarms sounded in the power plant indicating a reduction in the amount of water supplied to the pump. Workers found a large puddle near the filter. Well, first off, see the word puddle, then leak. But the actual number is 7 tons. If someone, say you got a family and you got a babysitter. Babysitter calls you up and says there's a leak at your house. You go home, you find 7 tons of water. Are you going to call that a puddle? You're going to call that a leak? Are you going to call these people journalists? Who, by the way, never put their names on the story. For some bizarre reason. Probably got nothing to do with the fact they lie constantly. This is a 40-year-old plant they want to restart. Well, they did restart in 2021. It was stopped in October due to non-compliance with anti-terrorism security requirements. Terrorists. Worry about terrorists when they're the actual terrorist. That's what a nuclear plant is. It's a terrorist. These are disease factories. In a rational world, they wouldn't even exist. They should be stopped immediately. Better to have no power than nuclear power. All they do is lie. They don't know how to tell the truth. And they went to school to get the job, to tell the lies on top of that. There was a lawsuit trying to stop it from starting back up. Old, brittle, neutron-bombarded, fragile disease factories that are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment from the fuel pools all day, every day. It's bizarre. Environmentalists warn of drastic consequences of climate change. Environmentalists. Not scientists, not academics, not universities, not journalists, but environmentalists. And this person is not a environmentalist, by the way. James Lovestock finally passed away. It's a good day for planet Earth, and believe it or not. A 103-year-old misery machine. Claims he was a scientist and an inventor and an environmentalist. But his actions tell you that he's not. He predicted by the year 2100 there would be few 100,000 humans left on the planet living close to the poles. And that global warming would be so severe that food supplies would dwindle to near nothing. He was pro-nuclear, and in his view, the fossil fuel industry teamed up with the Greens to sink a technology that has much less than a carbon footprint than traditional fossil fuels. Much less of a carbon footprint. You know what a gas, oil, coal plant is that runs your cities and stuff like that. Well, they use 2 of them to run a nuclear power plant. Do you know what they burn? They don't burn nothing. They burn carbon, which is great for the planet, by the way. They burn oil, gas, and coal. And then using the word carbon-free or carbon this or carbon that, that's propaganda. It's meant to make you think that nuclear has redeeming qualities or something, when it's the absolute opposite. Nuclear are genocide machines, omnicide machines, I should say. He founded an organization you probably know quite well, Environmentalists for Nuclear Power. It's like a tongue twister, isn't it? Within environmentalist circles, this was considered near blasphemy. And a few other important environmentalists agreed with him, specifically fellow British writer, and again they're going to claim George Monbiot is an environmentalist. And anybody who knows this story about nuclear knows that George Monbiot is a zombie. He's a nuclear zombie. He'll claim anything to make nuclear look as if it has redeeming qualities. Again, reducing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's so absurd to suggest that carbon dioxide is heating the planet up. It's absurd. Radiation, on the other hand, is an invisible plume covering the entire planet, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light for millions of years. That's actually real. pretend that George Monbiot is... It's just... The whole story is absurd, and this is what media is. Its job, apparently, is to make evil look normal. To make evil look like the good guy. That's what a journalist is. By the way, the Guardian of England is a fantastic newspaper, really. This is the author writing this particular paper. In my opinion, it's on par with the New York Times and the Washington Post. This is absurd to suggest that they have any redeeming qualities. It is worth reading just for George Monbiot's column alone. So the person who wrote this is bigoted and racist and biased and prejudiced by nature, obviously. Or as the founder of 350.org said, just wait until we can't grow corn in Iowa because it's too hot. 350 parts per million is considered the safe level for the Earth. By the way, he checked and the current level is 416 parts per million, which is why we have lots of plants and trees, see? Because that's what carbon... You can't have life without carbon. He said, out of nostalgia, I watched the movie No Nukes. I did myself this morning, by the way. It was a film that came out in 1979, went a long way to stopping the nuclear power movement in the United States. It came out immediately after 3 Mile Island. It had musical stars like Jackson Browning, James Taylor, Doobie Brothers, Carly Simon, Bruce Springsteen. There's a lot of good artists in there. And they're worried about the genetics of humanity. That's what the concert was all about. The word nuclear was going to destroy the genetics of life on Earth because of radiation fallout. And they were right. They didn't understand the biggest threat to humanity is the fuel pools and nuclear power plants. They're still splitting the atom all day into the environment. Our 1,000 plus nuclear fuel pools worldwide, constant radioactive emissions, an imminent threat to humanity, the 8 million species? And the answer obviously is yes. It's an imminent threat. It's equal to a meteorite coming at our planet. We have to make adjustments on this planet immediately to ensure that the species and humanity, and females in particular, can survive. After Fukushima, Jackson Brownie, Bonnie Raitt, and others did the same thing. Another major concert after Fukushima to denounce disgusting disease factories known as nuclear power. Fukushima is still pouring radiation to the ocean, just like Chernobyl. There's an uninhabitable area around Fukushima of 311 square miles. Well, no, they're supposed to abandon Japan. Tokyo was 29 million atoms of just after a rainfall, for goodness sakes, per square meter. You're supposed to at least abandon half of Japan. Now, of course, it's never too late, by the way. Around Ukraine and Chernobyl, there's 1,000 square miles of uninhabitable land as a result of the devastating accident in 1986. First off, they closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom, because of Chernobyl radioactive fallout, which meant you were supposed to abandon Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom, because it doesn't just fly around looking for farms. It meant everything got contaminated, particularly the fresh water and the air. Also, they closed the freshwater fish in Switzerland for 30 years because of Chernobyl fallout. Chernobyl fallout, in academic studies that we gathered up, claims that the fallout changed the sex ratio of all males and females to more males throughout Europe because of Chernobyl radioactive fallout, which means you really should abandon Europe. because it's contaminated. That's assimilated in everything there now at this stage. You can't do that, by the way, without changing the sex ratio of all the species, which means more males, less females, less population of all the species. And which means genetic damage in increments over time, eventually the extermination of the species. The nuclear industry only accepts people that are childlike, are incapable of being assertive, and don't have the attributes of a hero or a human. It takes a decade or more to build a nuclear power plant. It takes 2 weeks to get solar panels placed on your roof. The quickest and safest solution of the energy sector, not climate change, because you can't. In order to fix the climate, you got to knock the radiation out of the environment. You got to contain it, because it's pulsing energy every second for millions of years. The quickest and safest solution for the future of energy is through electrons, not through plutonium. All the huge wildfires in the United States, France, Spain, Russia, are just because of poor forest management. Because that's what somebody thinks, that the forests are mismanaged or there's something else at play. The radiation fallout goes into your forest and it just hovers. It also gets into the ground, but it also just hovers above the ground, pulsing energy every second. It sterilizes all the bacteria and fungus in your land, in your plains, in your forests. And so the litter and the foliage doesn't break down because it doesn't have the biota, right, the mass of life it takes to break down the material anymore, because the radiation has destroyed it. So it looks like a forest, but it's not. It's silent. You'll notice that right away. And that you won't see any spider webs in your forest, for instance. You'll see them on your buildings and your houses, but typically you're not going to find them in your forest in a radioactive area. And so when you have a forest fire, because the foliage and the litter didn't break down the way it's supposed to, you have a lightning strike, all of a sudden you have a huge forest fire on your hands because the forest has all this extra foliage and litter gathered up. How did we do last night? Last night our video was 2 hours, 44 minutes and 24 seconds. 12 hours later, 12 hours later is 2 hours, 44 and 31 seconds. So it's an extra 7 seconds longer. After exactly 12 hours later, my videos gets a little bit longer. I'm going nuclear to beat Putin at his own game. This is from Forbes. And of course, Forbes is James Conkra, Michael Schellenberg's. These are revolting, despicable parasites for pro-nuclear. There's nothing they won't do or say for pro-nuclear. And the claim that going nuclear to beat Putin, for Vladimir Putin, it would take you 14 to 20 years to build a couple of plants. Last year, worldwide, there was 291 gigawatts worth of renewables came online in just 12 months. That's equal to 333 nuclear power plants worth of renewables. But these headlines are absurd. Anything. They'll put out anything each day in order to try to help their idol, the nuclear industry. Fukushima's OKs facility construction for treated water release plant. The word treated, of course, you can't filter the water because the filter becomes so radioactive after 10 or 15 minutes. The that's going in, that when it comes out the other side, is going to be incredibly more radioactive than it already is, which is over 2 sieverts per liter of just beta that they acknowledge. And they're not acknowledging alphas, gammas, neutrons, which would be equal or more. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose, by the way. You'll die within a couple of weeks of that exposure. There's 0 possibilities you can change the filters. The tanks were built to trick you into thinking that they're capturing the water and they weren't poisoning the Pacific Ocean. And that's their official story, by the way, right now. And if you really want to flush it out, I produced presentations just on the tanks, and they're in my playlist. And I give you documentation all the way from the beginning all the way up to current. For instance, they had 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,200 tanks in 2014, 900 tanks in 2017, 1,000 tanks in 2019, 1,000 tanks in 2020, 1,000 tanks in 2021, 1,000 tanks in 2022. They claim the water is gathering up at 150 tons a day, which is the same amount as a garden hose puts out. Which means divide a garden hose 4 ways, and that's what they're spraying on melted reactor cores in multiple buildings each day is one of those streams. That's divided 4 ways from a garden hose. Calling the industry absurd is bigotry behind care home killing still a challenge in Japan. I was reading a story, and well, it's got nothing to do with nuclear, Dana. But wait a second, it's got to do with a culture that is a threat to all the species on the planet, by the way. 6 years after this guy killed 19 residents at a care home for people with intellectual disabilities, because if you got intellectual disabilities in Japan, they'll ship you away immediately. Advocates are calling for a society that better integrates those that are not 100% healthy. And he killed them when they were sleeping. And then he injured 26 others. The ultimate cowardly thing to do, of course. Although this drew widespread expressions of disgust, tens of thousands of people went online to support him. Tens of thousands of people went online to support him. In fact, in 2020, there was 2,400 cases reported. Cases of abuse directed at people with disabilities have not fallen in numbers since the attack. 2,400, and there's also a stigma for reporting it, right? But 2,400 were reported attacks upon disabled people in Japan. That place got problems, baby. People think that they can't be different from others or feel that they can't fall behind in Japan's society. In fact, those who do are clearly excluded from society. And that most of the wounded and the families of those killed have chosen to remain anonymous out of fear of further discrimination. And the names of 7 of the victims only are engraved at the memorial because the people are afraid to put the family members' names there. And unlike the last story about the tanks, which is the same media, this tank had an author on it. When they do stories on nuclear, they don't put a name on it. They do stories on anything else in this media, they put a name on it. China seeks to dominate Western nuclear energy industry. Again, this is posturing. This is strictly posturing. Lots of posturing. Hi, everybody. I was hoping to see Stephen Young again tonight, but we didn't last night or tonight. I know he's not doing very good. If we are to meet our climate goals in the coming 3 decades, nuclear capabilities will need to more than double. This is the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi. A very vile and despicable person. Some money at the United Nations headquarters in stupid New York. I used to get phone calls from New York from payphones. I looked up the numbers, right? And these were short phone calls to somebody. You can hear their voices were distorted always, and they had really their voices were like, how somebody would call you up in a panic and say, hey, listen, blah, 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 blah. And then they would hang up, right? And I would say, I can't understand what you're saying because your voice is distorted. But I would get other calls from New York, and they were very, very violent towards me. So it was obviously, there was a descending opinion going on, and they were censored. They were censoring me in real time. It is clear nuclear energy is gaining public acceptance. It's not clear nuclear is not gaining public acceptance. This is desperation, the way they talk, isn't it? It's particularly last year, we're seeing this incredible desperation. Some 30 countries are various stages of considering or planning to build. Like, if you're at the various staging of considering, it's not a nuclear renaissance. It's not public acceptance. There's a big difference between public acceptance and corporations trying to make a buck. This is the Director General of a corporation for the military industrial complex known as IAEA. The sector has been wiped out in many European countries and US, and they don't have the technicians or the technologies. America doesn't have any skill at all to building nuclear plants. Neither does United Kingdom, for starters, right? France has to do it. France doesn't have the manpower or the skill to keep up with their own plants, let alone other countries, because the plants they are building in other countries are a decade behind schedule, double and triple and quadruple over budget. And France doesn't have a very good legacy. All of their reactors have major flaws. Western countries have been working to shut down their nuclear plants, particularly in the wake of disaster caused by the earthquake and tsunami in the vicinity of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan. The Heritage Foundation told the Washington Reg that nuclear power is going to be part of the future energy mix, and so people got to get their head back in the game. But it's not that simple. You can't just say you got to get your head back in the game. It's a huge undertaking. Huge amount of coordination necessary to pull it off. It's stupid. Every facet of it is actually so stupid. It's the most carbon-intensive thing per se. I shouldn't use the word carbon. It's the most resource-intensive thing in human history is a nuclear power plant. There's nothing else compares to it. And just to build it, to run it, and then decommission it, you need dedicated external 2 major coal, gas, oil plants, which normally powers a city, dedicated to build it, to run it, and 60 years to try to mitigate the harm from the radiation left over. Putin launched a full-scale offensive to overthrow the Ukrainian government. U.S. and European officials mobilized and imposed severe economic sanctions on Russia as punishment, which was we wouldn't take their resources, which meant massive inflation that has caused serious permanent damage to the entire planet. You had 195 countries from the military-industrial complex known as UN, aka the New World Order, and 30 countries known as NATO, which is, you go to their website and this NATO's 30 militaries. There's zero benefits to come out of putting 30 militaries together. It's like taking all the mafias and putting them together under one roof. Nobody's safe. But who is United Nations? It's 195 militaries. What did George Bush Sr. call them? I'll play that clip for you. He calls them the New World Order, and that's what they are. They're also, a better way to describe them is the military-industrial complex.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Yeah, don't swallow your toothpaste, folks. I actually done that. I don't recommend doing this, by the way, but I'll tell you what happened, and please don't do it. But I took a large lick of toothpaste that like covered my whole toothpaste. I had to know for sure how harmful was toothpaste. So I took my toothbrush. I put a full length of toothpaste. I took it off, and chewed it up, and swallowed it. And within probably a minute, I was on the floor. And I didn't get off the floor for about 2 minutes. And the room was... and I was blacking out. I was sweating. I was disoriented. This went on for 2 minutes straight. My heart rate went... from eating a chunk of toothpaste. Because of the fluoride, the poison that's actually in it. Like, I don't buy toothpaste with fluoride, first off. You buy toothpaste without fluoride. And so you can see why children are unresponsive in the mornings when they're brushing their teeth and you're yelling at the child to hurry up, because they'll swallow it because it's sweet on purpose. See? And so the child doesn't even know what planet they're on. It's actually child abuse to give a child toothpaste with fluoride. That should be child abuse. It's a horrific thing. That's why a child will say they don't feel good in the morning after brushing their teeth, because they were swallowing a little tiny fraction. Imagine that a full piece that went into my toothbrush dropped a human adult. Imagine what it'll do to a little child. And so I had a friend of mine, she has 4 kids, and we argue sometimes, let's put it that way, and get pretty friggin' rowdy. So I said, well, go get the toothpaste and eat it. I'll shut up. And I said, no, don't eat it. I said, no, don't eat it. She's like, no, smurf you, Dana. And, well, that's not the word she used, but she used the F word. And she took a big piece on her finger. Should have seen her. As soon as she come to her senses, about 3 or 4 minutes later, she took all the toothpaste out of the bathroom, threw it in the garbage can. Holy shit, she said. That was something else. My God. Just my God. She said, can I get toothpaste without fluoride? And I said, yeah. I said, I'll go get it for you if you like. I'll pay for it because that made me happy, right? I was trying to persuade her not to give the kids that kind of toothpaste. And in order to shut me up, she had to eat a full chunk of it like I done. And then I tried to stop her from doing it because I knew that wasn't going to be any fun. She cried, eh? She was so shocked on the ground. She started crying. She said, am I going to be all good? Should we call a doctor? Should we call an ambulance? I said, no, you'll be okay in a minute or two. I was like, whoo. Anyway, back to the scumbag nuclear industry. Grossi said something, which Grossi said nobody died from Fukushima last year at the Constipated Party 26 Grand Pupa in United Kingdom. We covered it for the 13 days, right? And it started on Halloween and ended 13 days later. Higher cases on hitting it on the 13th of October. Started on Halloween and ended on the 13th. That made perfect sense, actually. But he got laughed at the auditorium when he was doing his speech claiming nobody died from Fukushima. Everybody laughed at him, started jeering him. Which was it made it into the media to come out and try to protect him, right? To defend him. Particularly the scumbags at Forbes. Some people ask whether nuclear can be built quickly enough and whether governments are willing to make the investments. He said the answer is yes. Well, how would he know? Because it has been done before, he said. 40% of the nuclear power plants we rely on today were built, in fact, in the response to the oil shock in 1970s. And so they ran a campaign. What happened was the nuclear industry, which controls your universities and your medias, and they've done that in increments over 80 years, and they 100% captured it at this stage. And they put key people in key positions in all the major corporations because they control the universities and governments. It's hard to believe when I'm telling you, I'm sure, but it's true, unfortunately. And so when Russia invaded so-called Ukraine, which was captured by NATO, they went right directly into Chernobyl, right? And so the world all of a sudden started asking questions like, this is scary. So the world's universities, the world's medias worldwide got together and came out with a campaign to promote nuclear since February of 2022. That's a fact. And now they're using that. They use that to artificially inflate the prices of uranium stocks and to try to kickstart another renaissance, so-called renaissance. But thank goodness that failed. It's a very interesting statement, though, that he brought that up. Japan, Food Navigators Asia. Wow. They must be owned by the nuclear industry because they always seem to promote radioactive food. And they do it like nobody else we've ever seen. And we cover everybody. It took us 2 hours and 40 minutes last night to cover the 24-hour news cycle, for goodness sakes. And they also bring up GM food labeling, which is really weird because they do promote GM. Promotional drive. Japan gears up for marketing campaign to promote food products in the United Kingdom. That was a headline from last week. We covered that, of course. You're welcome, Vivian. Thank you. Japan's food firms and regions affected by the Fukushima nuclear disaster will be greatly encouraged by the UK's abolition of all import restrictions. And import restrictions from a nuclear wasteland, lifting the import restrictions of a nuclear wasteland at the same time at major events where the media is gathered up. Just a couple of people shaking hands. No science, no academics, no referendums like Taiwan, no nothing. Just tough luck. You're going to be eating food from a nuclear wasteland. And 55 countries banned it from 14 prefectures, not just the Fukushima prefecture. Trade officials now preparing a significant marketing push to promote food from a nuclear wasteland. They're gone to war against you. What are you going to do about it? It's time to gut up. And you can do something about it. You live in that one moment in history where you can actually do something about it. The Scottish, the English, the Welsh parliaments, who don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radioactive food, by the way, all passed legislation last month to remove all import restrictions on all foods coming out of a nuclear wasteland. And the development comes about 6 months after it reported the UK Food Standard Agency's published a risk assessment reports on radiological risk to human health, which is bizarre because the UK Food Safety Agency is obviously not a safety agency. It's a Satan agency, but it's not a safety agency. In fact, several years, about 4 years ago, they lifted the restrictions from Fukushima Prefecture and surrounding prefectures on baby food with no checks. No, ship all the baby food you want from the nuclear wasteland. We're not checking it, by the way, so don't be afraid to mix in Fukushima food you couldn't sell before. Japan has updated its food labeling regulations for food with genetically modified components. It will enact a national non-GM labeling system, a non-labeling GM system. Wow, I'm shocked. Okay, I'm not. Japan looks at everybody as if they're disabled. Others, meanwhile, have been working at providing proof that the GM crops are of no danger to the local economics of food safety and can provide a much-needed boost to the local. Mothers for America had commissioned a very expensive study, it was like $100,000, on GMO corn. And so what they found out was that, so GMO corn would typically have 6,500 parts per million of calcium. And it would have 3,500 parts per million of potassium. And it would have 2,500 parts per million of magnesium. And 800 parts per million of, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was somewhere around that. 800 parts per million of iron. And the list just keeps going, right? So when they got the study back on the GMO corn versus organic corn, you needed 425 GMO corn to get the same amount of calcium, magnesium, potassium, iron, carbon, cobalt as you would get from a single organic corn on the cob. You would get more nutrition licking a stamp than you would eat in the GMO corn on the cob, in other words. Try. What do you got for supper? We're going to lick a few stamps. I can't find anything on the GMO corn, so I bought some stamps instead because there's a lot more nutrition from the glue, right? You think I'm making it up? Probably, don't you? You don't know me very good. I don't make stuff up. What's the point? Nothing is as shocking as nuclear or faxes. So you needed to eat 400 truck to fill up the back seat of your car with 425 GMO corn on the cob to get the same amount of nutrition as you get from a single organic corn on the cob. That's pretty rotten, isn't it? It gets worse, though. They engineered in toxins and dioxins and formaldehydes into the genetics of the corn. And, it's better to eat cardboard, for sure, than it is to eat something from GMO. But the toxins, the dioxins, and the formaldehydes, they have adverse side effects that are stunning. They don't like you at all, let's put it this way. Earlier this year, the local Consumer Affairs Agency published documentation announcing that 9 major agricultural products are now subject to mandatory GMO labeling, up from the previous 8, as are processed foods that are used as ingredients. Okay, so the first story I showed you was about this nuclear plant that was leaking water, and the story was from a known pro-nuclear media, right? Which was Nuclear Engineering International. This one is from the degenerate Global Times, but at least it's not the pro-nuclear. So they put some more information in. 7 tons of water containing radioactive elements. They're claiming 2.2 million becquerels. But they don't quantify those assertions at all, which means it's not. What, 2 million becquerels per liter? According to the Waste Management Recycling, see, nuclear, the word nuclear, they don't put the word nuclear, but it's nuclear waste management is what they're talking about. And recycling. Those shouldn't go together. You shouldn't recycle man-made anthropogenic radioactive materials. Japanese Ministry of the Environment says 100 becquerels a kilogram is the standard for safe recycling of waste. Which is not, by the way. And 8,000 becquerels a kilogram is standard for safe disposal of waste. So if that's soil, I'll bring up the calculator. I'll show you how that actually works. Because the idea is to teach you, not tell you. So 8,000 per kilogram, you're going to multiply it by, normally I say 64 or 68. We'll do 68 because that's actually the number. Is 544,000 atomic decays a second per square meter. Per square meter. That's a catastrophic amount of radiation, by the way. How's our poll going tonight? Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing good here tonight. I apologize for last night's show. It was a long one. And that's all you can do, unfortunately. Our 1,000 plus nuclear fuel pools constant radioactive emissions, imminent threat to humanity. And this has been going on for decades. And so the answer is yes. And thank you for everybody that participated. Again, according to the Waste Management Recycling Department, Japan's Ministry of Environment, Japan doesn't have them. Well, they do got a Ministry of Department of Environment, Dana, but this has been captured by the industry, just like the regulatory agencies have all been captured. In August 2004, pipeline of reactors broke down, which killed 5 and seriously injured 6 people. They had another accident previous to that in 1991. So there's a very bad history in that place, and the truth might never come out, but we'll keep an eye on it and see what we can find out. It obviously had an event, and they're calling it leak in a puddle when it's 7,000 tons, 14,000 pounds. Suspended sediment reduced by rapid revegetation after Fukushima decontamination. That picture there is actually bags. You can almost make it out. So they're talking about by picking up the soil and putting it in bags. When it rains, a lot of that will wash into the rivers. Basically, what I'm able to. It's meant to cover up what happened, by the way. The effects of the increased sediment load in rivers during the recovery phase after nuclear accident are a key consideration decontamination efforts. A study published this month in Nature Sustainability, a group led by the University from Japan, Tsukuba, had revealed that although the initial effects of the increased sediment load in rivers caused by the Fukushima decontamination efforts were unsustainable, several factors worked in the region's favor to reduce these effects. After the nuclear accident, Japan released a large amount of radioactive cesium into the landscape. Of course, for every radioactive cesium, there was 100 strontium-90s. But the reactors running uranium, plutonium. The biggest byproduct of radioactive fuel was curium isotopes. And curium isotopes, you need lead shielding that's 20 times thicker than you do for lead shielding for plutonium, which is named after the devil. And they don't acknowledge curium. Let me see if I can find that, because it's been a while since we brought that into the conversation, right? I'm pretty good at finding that, but I'm not that good. Let me see. It takes a second for the... Let's hope it shows up anyway. I don't see the folder, unfortunately. Hang on, I might get it. I might get lucky. Oop. I think we got lucky. I've got no idea what I got down there. Hang on, here we go. Let's bring it in. Yeah, Dr. Raymond Gilmedy. Curium isotopes are a major byproduct in irradiated nuclear fuel. They're a major byproduct and comprise a significant fraction of the alpha-emitting radionuclide inventory. Although little use is currently being made of the purified curium sources, isotopes, such usage is possible if reprocessing a nuclear fuel becomes feasible. They've done studies on the dogs. All the dogs died in all the studies, by the way. This study with 144 beagles, puppies, and dogs, death started from 1.5 to 5.4 years after the exposure. Tumors of the lungs, the skeletons, the livers occurred beginning about 3 years after exposures. So there are multiple tumors in the same animals. Bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death, and lung tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors, which were found in 20 dogs, were the cause of death in only 2 dogs, occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs. And tumors in the 3 organs often occurred in the same animal and were competing causes of death. So lung, liver, and bone is what you expect from a nuclear accident. And yeah, curium isotope is the biggest byproduct, and that's Loveless Respiratory Research Institute. They have 93 studies from Gilmedy. And the only reason I have the 93 studies from Gilmedy is because KRQE attacked me when WIP melted down, the WIP Waste Isolation Pilot Project in 2014. And KRQE attacked me, chopped up my video and put it on television. So I went to KRQE and checked out their site and put in Fukushima. We found Dr. Raymond Gilmedy. And he was talking about, you don't have to worry about Fukushima because it's not going to make it to America. And that is like a banana and a potato chip. I actually got the clip there, but I'm not going to play it for you. And so I looked up Dr. Raymond Gilmedy. He had 93 studies at a Navy facility called Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, where he killed beagle dogs and beagle puppies with man-made radiation. He was the expert. And he didn't interview him inside of Loveless. He interviewed him outside Loveless on the sidewalk with the facility in the background. The reason he didn't interview him inside because the cries of the dying animals, I guess. Mechanical decontamination used to recover contaminated regions like Chernobyl were conducted by the Japanese government of Fukushima in the years fall. This is not academics or scientists or nuclear students. This was the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language. That's who done the work there. There is no heralds in the nuclear industry, period. None. None. Not one. There's not even one likable person in the nuclear industry that resonates with the world. Not much was known about whether these disturbances have long-term secondary effects on downstream catchment. Again, the study that they're done there, I'm just going to move on, was pure propaganda. It was pure deceit and dishonesty, which is what you expect from universities, right? You can't hold it against them because you know that's what they're going to do. You know they're evil, right? Well, at least you should anyway. More than 30 people, it was 36, which is definitely more than 30 people, killed in an anti-United Nations New World Order military-industrial complex demonstration in the Congo. There's this long, terrible history, by the way, with Africa and United Nations. 170 injured. I've been following that for the last number of days, by the way. And ransacked and looted a UN mission. Well, let's go back to what's really happening with the United Nations peacekeepers in the sex for food scandals. Women at a camp in Guyana told the researchers, in this community, nobody can get corn, soya blend without having sex first. So a kilo of food for sex for the most vulnerable of society. Food for sex. Sexual coercion and immunity at the United Nations. Yeah, they're really good at child raping. I noticed United Nations military-industrial complexes soldiers. They're extremely good at raping children. Hey, it's United Nations. What do you expect, Dana? I know, I'm just saying. France, what is the threat to nuclear power plants from the third heat wave? France got a long dry summer ahead of it on top of it. They got 31 reactors shut down, most of them because of corrosion, which means they're not opening anytime in the future. Guess who France gets a lot of their power from? Germany. France is facing a third heat wave. There's a fourth and fifth coming too, by the way. The increase in the thermometer falls on nuclear power generation is heavily dependent upon water, and 4 power stations were temporarily removed from environmental regulations in July. So should we worry about ecological impact in nuclear security? Ecological impact is where you don't shut the reactors off when they heat the river to the point where the marine life can't survive, which is what they got done. A few days of relief and France is suffocating again. Well, it depends upon the glaciers. The glaciers are almost gone because of Fukushima. Heat stroke, they're completely gone in the Cascades and the Rocky Mountains because of Fukushima. The research expeditions we've done along the entire Rocky corridor showed totally zero ice. Just snowpack shows up a bit in the winter. Pre-Fukushima, everything was covered in ice all year long, 25,000 feet deep. Heat stroke is affecting the production of French nuclear power plants. Highly dependent on water, nuclear installation must be completely cooled permanently to be able to operate safely. This explains their formation by the sea near rivers and streams where they draw large amounts of water. It's typically 1 million gallons a minute, 4,500 tons a minute. In cases where there's a risk to the balance of the electricity network, the EDF may request a waiver. So if they need the energy, instead of worrying about the rivers overheating, they get a waiver, which means you're going to kill all the species. With the Nuclear Safety Authority, which the non-regulatory, non-safety authority, in general, able to be exempted by the need for reinforced environmental monitoring. In other words, all the checks and balances goes out the window because there's a heat wave. It's stupid on a whole different scale, by the way. And in other words, they're required the right to discharge hotter than usual into the environment. According to the Environmental Association, the nuclear fleet is completely dependent upon water. How could there be no apprehension in the face of increasing numbers of rivers that is already dried up in France? Which French's river are from the glaciers, which means the glaciers are not there anymore. In December 1999, Hurricane Martin swept over a certain area. Part of the nuclear power plant was flooded. In an emergency, the reactors were shut down. Just a miracle he didn't have a nuclear meltdown. So you can have 40 years of perfect conditions with nuclear, then have a nuclear meltdown. And that mitigates any possible benefits you had for 40 years because you just destroyed the future and permanent of your country and the planet. U.S. regulators to certify first small modular nuclear reactor design. So sick of these stories, eh? Nuclear power seems to flip-flop between savior and boogeyman every few years. It's not a savior. It can't be a savior. It's a boogeyman. That is what a nuclear is. That particularly the people. The people in the nuclear industry, they're the perfect zombies. If you're going to do a zombie movie, try to hire those people. They're the perfect zombies. Zero emotions. As climate change escalates due to the use of fossil fuel. Notice how they put that in there? Well, hang on a second, though. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't cover your planet. They're too big. They can't travel very far. But nuclear emissions covers the planet. This model is just 16 days. 16 days. See, a nuclear bomb doesn't constantly emit radiation for millions of years, does it? Just for a millionth of a second. But a nuclear meltdown is a disease factory in overdrive as they are. The fuel pools at the nuclear power plants are disease factories. Speaking of fuel pools, our 1,000 plus nuclear fuel pools constant radioactive emission, an imminent threat to humanity. And we got an astounding 96%, 98%. Excellent. Knew the right answer. This is 100% posturing, by the way. This is posturing in overdrive. Configurations tested. There's nothing tested. They're not even built. Calls for 12 small modular reactors, about 9 feet tall, all sunk in a reactor pulled together. They each generate 160 megawatts and with a yield of 50 for a total of 600. But the big problem is if one of them goes down and melts, the rest of them does too. First off, you got to get the kinks out of it. That's a decade. Then you got to rebuild it with new engineering. You got to do all the engineering. That's several years. Then to build it is another decade. Then you got to make sure you got the kinks out of it. And then you can start trying to mass produce it. But by then, we'll have conquered the renewables. It's just desperation. They're willing to take down the whole planet with them rather than do something good. They can make more money by coming up with renewable technology than they can with nuclear. On top of that, you got every university working on nuclear, not a single one working on renewables or storage. And their idea of storage, for some reason, is batteries. When you can use deep geological repository technology that won't exist, that only exists as a fable, you can use the, drill a hole in the ground, compress air into it, seal it, compress air into it. Now you got a big storage for major cities, for millions of people. But after publication, new energy projects will be able to specify they are using the new scale, small modular reactors without duplicating the design certification. So they passed the design certification for the test model, not for the finished product. This is for the test model. They won't say that there. They can't, and this is the so-called carbon-free power project. Carbon-free power project. The idea is to blame carbon instead of nuclear, when nuclear is the reason. The radioactive fallout, it pulses energy every second. Carbon doesn't. Carbon is good for plants and trees and animals and insects and humans and everything else. Nuclear is not good for anything. Nuclear is a plague. The atomic energy is needed to free ourselves from the energy crisis. The Jerusalem Post, they need the nuclear power plants for their nuclear weapons that they claim they don't have, but they admit that they do. Why would anybody have a conversation with them when they won't even admit they got nuclear weapons, despite the fact they'll admit that they got the nuclear weapons? See, that's as kooky as it gets. The nuclear... On December 1953, creep of zombie land, President Dwight Eisenhower, traitor, human trash, presented his dream really, that's an interesting one, for a new atomic age, coined Atoms for Peace. You really think that he thought this up and not the lobbyists? Outlined a vision of atomic energy utilization so efficient, the need for conflict would become a waste of time. Yeah, it was too cheap to meter, too green, free, clean, green, and too cheap to meter was what they were calling the Atoms for Peace, right? It has none of those attributes whatsoever, by the way. Push for nuclear energy for the benefits of all mankind. It's a curse on all species. It's the worst thing could happen to a planet was nuclear, man-made anthropogenic nuclear. It's truly the worst thing that has ever happened to this planet. It's better to get hit by a meteorite than have nuclear power on your planet. The resources that granted India their first nuclear weapon were supplied by leftover material from Canada. Of course, unfortunately, I'm from Canada, so... That's what the nuclear industry does anyway. It humiliates everybody in Canada all the time. We've been captured by the nuclear industry in the 70s, right? Canada was. And when Fukushima melted down, 3 months later, the nuclear industry lifted all restrictions on our supermarkets when every other country banned it. So Japan filled up our supermarkets. Now everybody in Canada is sick because they're eating radioactive food from Japan all the time. Experts at odds over nuclear power's role in fighting climate change. Yahoo News. The role nuclear power can or should play in helping the world reduce these emissions is hotly debated. Every facet of nuclear is hotly debated, which is really interesting, isn't it? You have the pro-lunatics, the crazies, who only repeat propaganda, vehemently attacking everybody that's honest and ostracizing anybody that is really honest, like myself. The climate hawks, many climate hawks. That's an unusual connotation, isn't it? Because that's exactly right, climate hawks, like war hawks, climate hawks. The United States stand ready to provide support and partnership to countries around the world that have prioritized nuclear in their clean energy and climate plans to address the global climate crisis. Well, the question is, if America is ready to support any country worldwide that wants to build nuclear, why aren't they building it in their own country? Wouldn't that make sense first? Most of America's reactors will be shut off by 2030. All American reactors are old. The last one that came online was Watts Bar. It was 42 years to get that online. The Volga plants they got there now bankrupted Westinghouse and Areva. Microsoft founder Bill Gates also supports its expanding nuclear power. So what? Do you think anybody actually idolizes Bill Gates on the entire planet? Is there anybody on the planet that admires Bill Gates, makes a difference, what Bill Gates says? Really? Is there anybody? It's hard to imagine a future where we decarbonize our power grid affordably without using more nuclear power, Gates says. We started a company to build small modular reactors. He's not doing anything. He's throwing money at a group of people. That's what he's doing. He's not hands-on. And he wants to build it in an old coal plant, right? Well, why not just dig down and tap into geothermal, in every plant? Secretary of Energy, who's pro-nuclear, we've covered enough times now to throw up, at last year's United Nations Climate Conference in Glasgow, Scotland, I covered all 13 days of it. Started on Halloween, ended on the 13th of November. That the Biden administration was very bullish on helping build the next generation of nuclear reactors everywhere but in America, which is a lie. It's 100% a lie. The U.S. Department of Energy recently made $6 billion in funding available to struggling nuclear companies. Like $6 billion is nothing for a nuclear plant, let alone 90 of them. It's an irrelevant amount of money when it comes to the nuclear industry. It's like $9 billion is irrelevant. Canada just refurbished one of their reactors, was $13 billion. The other refurbishment was $12 billion. Right, and they're trying to use $6 billion as a sign that there's a renaissance or a surge in the industry. Multinational electric utility, the second biggest in Spain, has entirely ditched nuclear and is directing 150 billion euros over the next 8 years to wind and solar, smart networks and storage solutions, which is quite interesting, actually. Strictly speaking, only solar, wind, geothermal, hydropower, or sort of like, water batteries where you have two artificial ponds and then excess energy pump water up to the next pond. Dam, right? You artificially create them in your mountains. It's easy to do. are considered renewables as they do not require additional fuel sources to provide energy. Nuclear can't provide energy without two external power supplies. Dedicated. Just get rid of the nuclear and use two external plants. It'll do the same energy. While issues like energy storage, which you can use, but the best one I'm seeing is the compressed air storage. You dig mine shafts and you compress air at 120 psi down there. You're going to create a lot of heat. You can store that in salt or sand, and you can store it for long periods. So when you want to unpack it, it's there for many weeks, sitting there waiting for you. It's a very cost-effective thing to do. And look at, every time I see somebody with the International Atomic Energy Agency podium, they literally look like someone just stuck a stick up there. Never mind. Belgium, where nuclear power provides almost half the country's electricity, plans to shut down the last of its 7 nuclear reactors by 2025. Spain's walking away, Belgium's walking away, Germany's walking away, because they're not stupid. In the same way that firing up shuttered coal plants has angered environmentalists, because you created that objection, right? By propaganda, by blaming coal instead of the real enemy, which is radioactive emissions that are pulsing energy every second for millions of years. Senior Climate Action Network, Esther says they represent over 1,500 European NGOs. And for us, nuclear is not a clean energy. Nuclear is not a cheap energy. It cannot be built up quickly and doesn't respond to challenges of acting quickly. And it creates significant problems with the management of the waste. The waste sits in fuel pools, pulsing energy, releasing or splitting the atom into the environment every second. So our 1,000 plus nuclear fuel pools, constant radioactive emissions, an imminent threat to humanity. And 98% of the people appropriately voted yes, like you should, because your fuel pools are hemorrhaging per liter absurd amount of radiation every day into your environment, which is why most nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. London-based energy consultant firm Lucid Catalyst in June released a report titled Beautiful Nuclear. That's so desperate to say that, eh? Beautiful nuclear. Can you imagine what kind of degenerate you are? You wrote that. In the United Kingdom, where nuclear provides power for 15% of electricity, interestingly, like now they're going to build a new reactor every year, which of course they're not, because France can't build them that quick, right? Because that's who's going to build them. And most of the reactors will be shut off by 2030, except for one, I think. So, like, if the big question is, why didn't, France and United Kingdom and America keep building reactors? They knew the other reactors were going to give up the ghost and break down or be taken out of service at some point. Why did they wait until it was too late to come out and publicly show their allegiance to this evil, insidious, monstrous industry for? No leader, however, has been more supportive of nuclear energy than French president. Well, if that was true, he would have built reactors right away when he was elected, not when he was on his way out. And he's not building any because France can't even build the ones they're trying to build as it is. In fact, they have to redesign their current reactors that they built in China and Finland. In February, Macron called for a rebirth of France's nuclear industry, announcing plans to build up to 14 new generation reactors to battle climate change. Every time I hear the word that, it's like It's like you're talking to a stick, a 2x4 or something, isn't it? That's obviously what the industry is up to since the 2015 Paris Accord, was to come out and trick people into thinking nuclear was the solution to the climate change caused by Fukushima radioactive fallout. In February, Macron called for the rebirth of France's nuclear industry. But it's precisely the underperformance of the French power plants this summer that for some is the final nail in the nuclear coffin. France's fleet of 56 reactors, only 26 are working. Used to supply a little over 70% of electricity, now it's 30%. They're shutting down all their reactors because they don't have glaciers anymore. So why would you build new reactors when you don't have water to cool them? Not only that, to build a reactor, you need many millions and millions and millions of gallons every day just to build these disease factories in the first place. It has to be highly purified water too, by the way. Normally, a summer electricity exporter, France was forced this summer to purchase this energy from Germany, who everybody's saying has no power. They got enough power to sell it to France. I think the nuclear industry is disgusting. I don't think it, I know it. I can actually physically prove it too. When people question the reliability of wind and solar, they suggest you should look at the French example. Nuclear is not as reliable as people would like to think, or led to believe, or deceived into believing. We can't decarbonize our economy with existing and cheaper renewable energy. Way to go, Yahoo! Like wind, solar, and geothermal. Where did that come from, I wonder? I hate Yahoo. Investing in nuclear would crowd out investments in cheaper, safer, renewable energies. Which is what we say all the time anyway, right? So why would we do it? He also regards the great hope in small modular reactors as misguided, regarding them as likely another fake promise and a costly option that comes with the same risk, including proliferation and even worse potential waste problem. It's not a worse potential, it's quantified now. It'll have 35% more intermediate level waste, 30% more high level waste, and 5% more fuel rods because they're so inefficient. And an absurd amount of tritiated radioactive 3H water. For all the ongoing debates about the role of nuclear power should play in order to transition away from fossil fuel, most analysts underscore that almost every country needs to move quickly to build more wind and solar, not nuclear. Russia's using a nuclear plant as a human shield, which is what I've been saying for about a week straight. At least the last 7 shows. I drink a lot of water a day. That's all I can do. I gotta pump the water. At the opening of the 10th Annual Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference at the United Nations, aka New World Order, aka the Military-Industrial Complex, Blinken pointed to North Korea's unlawful nuclear program. When was the last time North Korea attacked anybody? 70 years ago? When was the last time America attacked somebody constantly? They have 900 military bases worldwide. How many military bases North Korea have worldwide again? I forget. An ongoing provocation. I can't even pronounce that name. Provocation. Why can't I pronounce that word? That's because we done almost a 3-hour show last night. Took the good out of me. We got through it though anyway. It was a tough gig, but which has included seizing control of Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Russia's aggressions in Ukraine. It's blamed for everything, isn't it? despite the fact that it was United Nations countries, 195 of them, and NATO countries that said they put sanctions against Russia, which caused massive inflation in their own country. They didn't hurt Russia. They hurt, because Russia just sold it to somebody else. They hurt everybody in their own country permanently, though. The most vulnerable, too. The children suffered the most because of those actions. And those actions are only by a few. Just a couple of hundred people made those decisions to destroy their own countries. Is nuclear having a moment? No. It doesn't depend on who you ask. If you ask a public relation firm, what do you think they're going to tell you? They're just going to lie to you. Anybody that tells you nuclear is having a moment is lying to you. Nuclear hasn't had a moment, period, since 3 Mile Island, despite the fact that Santa Susana was equal to 460 3 Mile Islands melting down at the same time in radioactive fallout. Try wrapping your mind around that one. Nuclear energy, despite already producing half of all carbon-free electricity in the United States, and calling it carbon-free, that's such a desperate thing to say. That's all they got. It's not real, and that's what they'll say over and over. They have nothing else they can say. See, they make up that sentence, and that's it. It's beyond pathetic. And 10% of global power, dirty, the most dirty power on the planet. These are disease factories. Every one of these disgusting facilities, permanent disease factories. Each day, you got 1,000 fuel pools, probably 12, 14, 1,500 in reality, right? Say 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. Each fuel pool got decades of reactor cores, and each reactor core powered millions of homes by splitting the atom. When you took it out of the reactor core, you got to keep it in the fuel pool to try to start cooling it down. But cooling it down is because it's splitting the atoms. The atoms are physical isotopes. These are perpetual machines. They're perpetually making isotopes. Those isotopes are in the water, and then that water boils off each day. The fuel pools are boiling away at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. So they're boiling off about 120,000 liters in each pool worldwide, and each liter is millions or billions or trillions of isotopes. And of course, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod is the curium isotopes. So it's boiling off energy. When the water boils off, now it liberates the isotopes into the environment. Most of these facilities are surrounded by farms, because that's what evil does, right? That's the definition of evil, is a nuclear power plant surrounded by farm. That's actually evil. Not almost evil, that's actually evil. There's evil, and then there's nuclear industry. Nuclear is evil on its own scale. Hang on. I don't know what I got done with that. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, there we go. Just gonna take a moment. I'll just take you through it right quick because it's been a while, right? Alrighty. This is what evil looks like. I gotta get radioactive. Growing food by a nuclear is... Why would you do that? There's one picture missing, but that's okay. Let's keep going. So what do you think? I'll put this on a big screen. Do you think it's an accident that all these nuclear power plants, as far as you can see in the background, are farms? and that all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment from the fuel pools. All day, every day, for millions of years, that radiation is going to pulse energy every second. But the stuff that lands in the farms, as far as you can see in the backgrounds, whenever you get a good shot, as far as you can see, you'll see farms. And so that food is going to make people sick, for sure. It takes a while for it to get its mojo on the go, but that's what happens. You get sick. If you're eating it regularly, it's bioaccumulating in you. There's up to 1,800 illnesses, and diseases, and autoimmune deficiencies, and injuries, and illnesses, and diseases. There's heart problems, and liver problems, and lung problems, and respiratory problems, pituitary, and thyroid, and adrenaline. There's Alzheimer's, and dementia, autism, diabetes, and Down syndrome. Your immune system gets compromised immediately, so you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. And so they have tons of studies showing that it's not a good idea to grow food, because you can see how grapevines suck up radiation, and strawberries will suck up radiation, and plants will suck up radiation. Tomato plants will suck up radiation. You have studies on potatoes, and studies on fruit trees, and studies on fruit plants, and studies on wheat, how it sucks up the radiation, how it's transferred through the root system, how the meadows and everything else bioaccumulate the radiation. So why are they growing or building nuclear power plants in places surrounded by farms? It's because they hate you and despise you, and they're going to poison you in your supermarkets. They're going to make sure you can't get away from it. You can't escape it. And you have no way of protecting yourself. This is the most dirtiest secret in the nuclear industry, is what you're looking at right there, is that they're surrounded by farms. And it's not an accident. At 50 becquerels a kilogram, irreversible lesions, irreversible heart damage for children. At 50 becquerels a kilogram. Even future nuclear power plants, like this one in the United Kingdom, is going to be surrounded by farms. And the ultimate final insult is they're harvesting food right alongside of nuclear meltdowns on one side and 1-ton bags of radiation on the other side, smack dab in the middle of 14 prefectures that were banned by 55 countries worldwide. That's nuclear for you. Can't say nuclear without, you can't have death without nuclear. Is nuclear having a moment? No. So shut up. Nuclear energy is bouncing back. This was fun, this story here. It's a rare occasion to have any fun in this topic, isn't it? I played the video, I was listening to it, and this was extraordinary. You don't get too many videos that are actually put the work in. So they were, I'll get to that part in a second. U.S. energy correspondent for Financial Times. So they're talking about all the countries that like nuclear, talk about 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, downplayed the daily set of that. And they talk about the money it takes to run these facilities. They acknowledge that, some of it, not all of it by no means. They call it carbon free though, and they talk about construction of it. So the graphics were really good. Over budget, over time. It was unusual, really, and that it eats money to stay alive. Brilliant, eh? America shut down 13 nuclear reactors since 2015. So there's no nuclear renaissance because they're not even building new reactors, except for that the old ones they're trying to get up and running. 50% of the reactors in America will be closed by 2030. The small modular reactors are alleged to be revolutionary, but of course they're not. Then they show this graphic of nuclear winning the race. Look at this. Hard cases, aren't they? No matter what the weather is, nuclear can work, they claim. They claim solar power is no good. Renewables are no good. Only nuclear has any redeeming qualities. And then they even threw in the Joe Biden invested $6 billion, the U.S. government, not Joe, but what's $6 billion going to do for a bunch of old, decrepit, neutron, brittled reactors? It's going to do nothing. And then they put up their new guru, Bill Gates. This is hilarious. Cheerleader. Look what he's cheerleading pom-poms. I got to look at that one more time. That's too funny. Bill Gates with his school jacket on, his pom-poms, his atomic. That's hilarious, eh? Cheerleader. Yeah, one of the rare occasions being a scumbag actually works for the nuclear industry. Only carbon-free, scalable energy sources available 24 hours a day. You know, besides geothermal, tide power. And if you promote nuclear, you can never have an alternative. If you promote nuclear, it doesn't share the grid with any other energy sources on top of that. It's not carbon-free. It's the most carbon-intensive thing in human history. They're hard cases. These are perpetual liars, and this is what they do. Carbon capture and hydrogen. They just sing the song of the lobbyists and hope that the lobbyists throws them some breadcrumbs. Kind of like me, hoping that people will donate enough I can do some research, I suppose. Everybody's going to get a nuclear reactor in their back garden, ain't it? But in reality, nobody is. The nuclear industry, right? If we were on a ship and the ship was sinking, the nuclear industry would go around and punch holes in all the lifeboats. That's what they're actually like in real life. If you're on a ship with a Zodiac and the ship was sinking, the nuclear industry would come by and cut the Zodiac open. Peter Dutton, which is what somebody done to my boat on the way up to Alaska one year. When I was getting fuel, I went up to get groceries. When I come back, my pontoon boat was deflated. When I looked at it, a great big slice. Someone came by and cut it open on me. Peter Dutton had reached into the weeds of climate wars and pulled out nuclear energy. Reached into the weeds of the climate war. This is Australia. And there he is there, Mr. Monster himself. They were in power for 9 years. They didn't do it. Now they're not in power. Now they're crying for nuclear. But Australia is unique because they have it under legislation they can't have nuclear power. They can't, and the politicians are not allowed to debate that. On top of that. But no, they're out there constantly. And what's interesting about Australia is how, because if you know Australia swears, like the way Australia swears is abnormal. It's not normal at all. And they have a rule where teenagers are allowed to go topless on the Australian beaches. It's really weird, man. This will be a review on the nuclear energy. If you haven't been at this deranged rodeo for as long as I have, you may not know that nuclear power is practically utility liberal parties. Once you get into the left-right nonsense, you're not having a conversation anymore. The coalition was in power for 9 years. They had the power to progress the domestic nuclear industry, and it didn't. Now that's not in power, all of a sudden is screeching for nuclear. Australia is perfect for renewable energy. It has deserts you can fill up with solar. It has coastlines for wind energy. Put them on the mountains and the coastlines, you get permanent wind. It'll always be windy. You can put tidal energy because it has a massive empty coastline. You can do pond batteries where you create artificial reservoirs and pump water from one pond to another pond to store energy with excess energy. They have, but they're going to spend $90 billion on nuclear submarines. Like, somebody's really going to go in. If someone's going to invade Australia, the last thing you need to spend your money on is nuclear-powered submarines. It's just the nuclear industry has an incredible foothold in Australia, but it's not able to get a reactor there, and it's freaked out about it. In terms of the viability of small modular reactors, he stated that the technology had not changed. So there's no prospect of any domestic projects this decade, given the technology's commercial immaturity and high cost. But every 2 or 3 months, you'll get a surge of Australian articles on, we need nuclear, and the nuclear industry is trying to build a repository in farmland, of course, in Australia, and probably one of the best farmlands out there. And they divided the whole town in that conversation because they had a royal commission in 2016. We covered that when they were doing it. They brought in the propaganda experts, their expert propaganda, and they come in and told the people on the panel, radiation is like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine and sleeping next to somebody. But they still voted against nuclear despite the constant bombardment of lies and deceit and dishonesty. It was an incredible circus, and I was very frustrated. But thank goodness the people came to their senses and voted it out. But the dump they want to build in Australia, in farmland, prime farmland, is for medical waste. And so look, if you're putting radiation in somebody, and when it comes out it's so toxic, you need a deep geological repository, then you should consider what you just done to those humans is a crime. That's a crime. It's 100% crime. That's what nuclear is. It's 100% crime. Every facet of it on top of that is 100% crime. Again, it has no redeeming qualities, right? So, and I've just alluded to this Royal Commission, examined the viability of nuclear in 2016 and found it wasn't a goer. If the coalition wants to seriously advance nuclear energy, the question is, it must answer is simple. What level of taxpayer subsidies are you willing to locate to create a disease factory like nuclear? And why on earth would you subsidize the most expensive form of power when the cheapest form of power generation already exists and has none of the downsides of nuclear? And anything else is total bull crappy. Europe looks again at nuclear power after the Ukraine war makes Russia gas look like a less useful stopgap. So to show you this picture, remember that picture, that's a German nuclear power plant. But if you go look at an air shot of that nuclear power plant, this is what it looks like. That should make you throw up with fear, because the nuclear power plant's surrounded by farms as far as you can see. That is a terrifying picture, folks. That is a stunning picture. They show you this picture, but instead of showing you the real picture, I find interesting. And to me, because I've been doing this a long time. It's very worrisome because you know that it's going to harm an absurd amount of people that are eating that food. Everybody eats that food will get sick from it eventually. The calls to keep nuclear power has grown louder this year since Russia invaded Ukraine. We hear that many, 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 many times each day, by the way, don't we? Until recently, policymakers ruled out nuclear energy as a replacement, even though they account for 6% of the country's electricity generation. So 6% of the country's electricity generation is... Why would you go back to it? Welcome to the nuclear hell, the disease factory from hell. In January, French president planned to build 14 new reactors. Really, and they better get started. It's going to take them 5 years to get either site ready. They're not even trying, folks. It's as empty as promises you can get. And they got 31 shut down in the last year. Because the government built them, see? Poland this year unveiled plans for 6 nuclear reactors. And even inquired whether it could lease Germany's nuclear power plants. We covered that last week. That was one of the strangest stories imaginable. Poland wanted to lease Germany's plants that were going to close. Like, they're stupid, and then there's that story, really. That's the bonehead story of the year right there. There's highly unlikely there's a story that will knock that out of the bonehead of the year award. We'll see come December. But energy news: UK nuclear power station closes after 4 decades. I made me so happy to see that disease factory because it's surrounded by farms, right? Big surprise. Should terrify you every time you see a nuclear plant surrounded by farms. That should terrify you. Literally terrify you that they done that. Hinkley Point B switched off its second reactor on Monday, helping to generate, I'm going to have to say it, I apologize, zero carbon. The plant has to have a coal plant and oil plants capable of running a city. It has to have 2 of them dedicated to it. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So each each nuclear power plant has at least 2 of these plants running in the background to run. That's what they look like in the background. At least 2 of them are running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. 2 of these to build the nuclear plant site for 60 years to run it, and then for another 60 years to decommission it. These are running in the background. How can you call it? How can you call it emission free? Using the word carbon free is on purpose to deceive you, but emission free is basic. It's one big hoax. That's what the nuclear industry is. It's one constant, continuous, non-stop hoax, and it's pure propaganda. There's no science. The science was created 80 years ago, and that's what they're using. The people that created don't even exist anymore. The inbreeds of the inbreeds of the inbreeds are the ones that are in positions of opening their pie holes, has been providing 3% of Britain's energy. Well, whoopee-doo. 3%. You really think that 2 of these coal, gas, and oil plants wouldn't have replaced it? And you got to keep them running, despite the fact that the nuclear plant is closed down. You got to keep them running for another 60 years to decommission the disease factories that are still hemorrhaging from the fuel pools. The defueling process reportedly takes about 3 to 4 years, and we'll see the remaining nuclear fuel from the reactors removed and transported to Sellafield. And Sellafield, of course, surrounded by surrounded by farms. Sellafield had a meltdown in 1957. There's still 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic Ocean. Sellafield is surrounded by farms for this whole time, and that's poison people constantly on it. It's just, I'm heartbroken. Each day it just breaks my heart, these stories, though. Because I understand the harm from these facilities and the farms, right? The fact that they're surrounded by farms, that's sizable B. It looks like farms to me. I don't know about you, but it sure looks like farms to me. So, that look like farms, or am I just complaining? So, we got a poll tonight, because these facilities are hemorrhaging radiation from their fuel pools each day, and these places surrounded by farms. So are 1,000 plus nuclear fuel pools constant radioactive emissions an imminent threat to humanity? Of course it is. I'm not a mean-spirited person. I'm frustrated that the nuclear industry exists. It has no right to exist. It has no right to be on the planet, period. And as long as it's here, there's no hope for a future. I think the planet should have a future. And I think the species should have a future. The species can't have a future without nuclear power, with nuclear power on it. Rather. Estimates indicate Hinkley Point powered around 100 million UK homes per year. That's pretty interesting, because there's only 65 million people, I think it is, in the United Kingdom. So if there's 65 million people, do they all got multiple homes or something? Right? This is what they do. They love to fabricate, misrepresent, and deceive. This is what they do. Nigeria is not ripe for nuclear power plants. Nigeria can't even get rid of the garbage in its community, or the sewage. So it's not right for nuclear power. It's not right anyway. How are we doing here? Oh, we're almost there. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. Because that goes pretty quick around here, clicks. That's 40 clicks to get through, and we're done for the night. Well, you're done. I go back to work right away. It never stops for me. Shutting down my studio is like shutting down a nuclear power plant. It's a disaster. Despite the power supply challenge faced, they finally shipped my parts today. Yesterday. I'm tortured, eh? We haven't got any research expeditions in, and summer's racing. We're in August already, right? Despite the power supply challenge facing the country, a move towards setting up a nuclear power plant has been discouraged by energy experts who cited Nigeria's poor maintenance culture and insecurity. Thank goodness someone had common sense. Russia is going to put nuclear power plants everywhere, pay for it, going to build it. They're going to build it. They're going to supply the uranium. They're going to train everybody for a decade. This is nonsense. Now, Why don't they do that for geothermal or tidal energy? Why does it have to be nuclear? Because it's a genocide machine, an omnicide machine. A nuclear power plant was not the way to go at the moment, said somebody smart for a change. Another attraction is that if you're talking about clean energy, wind, apart from wind, nuclear is the cleanest because the process of nuclear fusion has very low impact on the environment. This is an absurd suggestion. So despite the fact he said no to nuclear, they're going to come out and lick nuclear's boots. It's also cheap. Again, this is absurdness to suggest nuclear is cheap. It's absurd. Go tell that to Finland. Go tell that to France. Go tell that to United Kingdom building reactors, that their reactors are cheap. It is cheaper than fossil fuel. No, it's not, actually. In fact, we covered this. It's cheaper to not build any nuclear plants whatsoever and take the money and use fossil gas or coal. Your money go a lot further. Mayak, to start reprocessing of fuel from Mayak. This is a nuclear wasteland, by the way. They've been around a very long time. They're leftover from the USSR. And Mayak is reprocessing a mixed oxide fuel facility. You heard the expression, the devil made me do it? That's Mayak. It's the very definition of evil. It's reprocessing, which is mixed oxide fuel, which is illegal in America and Canada, rightfully so, because the United Kingdom and La Hague in France, which by the way has 500 security guards, according to the academic studies that we are able to show, has contaminated the entire Arctic. Just those two reprocessing facilities, those two disease factories, which both are, by the way, surrounded by farms as far as you can see, ensuring nuclear and radiation safety. It's absurd. Every time I hear the word, they're going to ensure nuclear radiation safety. I'm not going to say you should throw them down on a set of stairs. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if somebody does. Design capacity will be more than 40 tons a year. A mixed oxide fuel. Problem with making mixed oxide fuel, first off, is that once it goes through a chain reaction, the emissions, the atoms that are coming out of the fuel rods, because they're still splitting the atoms, are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. But if you put it through a chain reaction again, mister, I'm telling you, it's horrific. Peaceful nuclear program. The sovereign right of all countries. And he's wearing a green tie while he says it on top of that. With that suit. Oh yeah, it's Hungarian's foreign minister. You have a sovereign right to poison everybody in your country and destroy your country's future, do you? Good for you. He told a United Nations conference. He practiced in the mirror, allegedly I heard, for 4 days straight with a shoe licking it. And then he went there and gave his speech. Nuclear power would take a while to start up in Australia. Coalitions set to back nuclear energy. We see these headlines every 2 or 3 months. There's a surge of them for about 3 days typically. And then they fiddle away again, right? The lobbyist comes out and they're throwing money everywhere. The media's like, yeah, write an article, we'll publish it, we'll stick a journalist's name on it and publish it for you. That's all it's about, right? In the United Kingdom, 1,200 people applied for 200 apprentices spots at a nuclear skill academy. The same nuclear skill academy, nobody there has ever went to Fukushima and relieved the homeless and the destitute the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language. PG&E plans to leave behind a radioactive mess at Diablo Canyon. This is a crazy story. They got a long listy. PG&E's history is just despicable, by the way. Doesn't seem to care how much of a radioactive mess it leaves behind, PG&E. But the residents of California should care, and the time to act is now. When PG&E specified the radiation cleanup standards it plans to apply to decommission the Diablo Canyon, it chose the lowest limit allowed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of 25,000 microsieverts per year. 25, yeah, you heard me. 25,000. Now, the emissions you should be talking about are in atomic decays per second. Not millirims, not microsieverts. That's a staggering number on its own, by the way. They use millirims, microrims, microsieverts and that to manipulate you and deceive you. That's the only reason they'll use that, because that's not how you actually would measure the decays of the fuel. Rather than the 60% tighter standard, 10 millirims per year. That's not a standard at all. That's 10,000 microsieverts. The Non-Regulatory Commission agreed to enforce in New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine. Of course it did, because that's a ridiculous high amount. It's a ridiculous high. And who's actually quantifying those assertions, by the way? Who's measuring it? If the industry's measuring it, you're insane to trust them. They're only going to measure gammas, and they're not going to do a good job of that. They're not going to measure alphas, neutrons, and betas, or the X-rays caused by them. Kevin Blanch got it right. Nuclear energy, hell of a way to boil a planet. Millirims. Protecting the health and safety of the general public. You don't protect it by exposing 25,000 millirims, micro sievers. That's absurd, by the way. Why is it going to be so high? Well, 90% of a nuclear site is bombarded with neutrons, right? That material is radioactive for millions of years. But this is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the neutron emission. We're talking about physical atoms, which is neutrons too, don't get me wrong, but the blather is eerily similar to the empty assurances PG&E gave regarding its gas pipeline inspections before the 2010 San Bruno catastrophe. How many people did they kill? Like 100 people with that fire? The 2017 Wine Country fire and its transmission tower maintenance program before the 2018 Paradise fire. Yeah, they got a long history of murdering people. While on probation, PG&E had said at least 31 wildfires, burnt nearly 1.5 million acres, burnt 23,900 structures, almost 24,000 structures, and killed 113 Californians in these 5 years. PG&E's gone on a crime spree and will emerge from probation as a continuing menace to California. That was one of the weird, good stories for a change, wasn't it? Nuclear test compensation for the French Polynesians, not enough. 16.6 million to 100 people or something like that. When over 110,000 were irradiated by the equivalent of about 7,000 Hiroshima's bombs worth of radioactive fallout over an extended period on top of that. What France done to the French Polynesian, to Niger, and to the Sahara Desert is up. The whole story is just, and for that entire legacy, they have claimed there was no adverse health effects whatsoever. Until 2010, when the compensation law was passed, France had claimed that its nuclear weapons tests were clean and caused no harm to the human health. And so, like, how can we move past this constant bombardment of lies? The problem with the nuclear industry is because they weren't held accountable, there's no incentive not to be even more evil. And isn't exactly what happened to us? There's no incentive not to be constantly, insidiously more evil. And somehow they managed to do that, become even more evil. The anniversary for Hiroshima and Nagasaki is coming at us full speed. We're going to cover both of those dedicated shows to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there's nobody covers it better than we do, unfortunately. There's many that could, but there's nobody that does. Despicable International Atomic Energy Agency got their grubby little disease factories in the Cameroonians' food. Australia should take a good look at nuclear power. Well, he did, and he said no to it 20 years ago, and actually made a law, said you can't have that conversation, so why are you? And that this media does this every couple of months, shows up. Shadow resource minister. Shadow minister. Creepy minister Susan MacDonald said nuclear power is a technology we should have a good look at. And I hope by the time we get to the next election we have something in place, she says. There's no reason to be evil. They just happen to like it, right? Russia holds nuclear plant, stumps Ukraine. Launching artillery fire from it 3 weeks ago. And they claim it would take a direct hit with something powerful to breach the reactor's cement containment vessels, a former engineer said. No, you just knock out the external power supply and it melts down 50 minutes later. You don't have to hit the building, moron. You don't have to hit the transformers close to it. You can hit the transformers 50 miles away. Or the highly radioactive spent fuel in cement canisters could be hit, spreading radiation in the air as a dirty bomb. Well, the fuel that's in the canisters is actual fuel rods. That'll melt down. That'll be just the same as a nuclear power plant meltdown. That's not a dirty bomb. That's a nuclear meltdown, where it gets to 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperature, starts atomizing and aerosoling, ionizing and radiating rocks and steel and cement and gravel forever, and releasing that into the environment as a continuous plume that covers the planet. It's all good until you melt down and cover the whole planet in radioactive fallout, and then everybody has to pay the price. Dana Nasana said it's his birthday Saturday. He's going to shelter in place. That's hilarious. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you. Yeah, there's new merch in my shop. We got to raise some money, folks. It's hard to appreciate how desperate we are at this stage. Yeah, the 2 links in the bottom of the description are the only ways you can donate to me. Or you can buy merchandise. There's another way. But I'm begging people to please consider, we got so much equipment broken down. This is the year of breakdowns for us. And just because it broke down don't mean we shouldn't fix it. Don't you think? I'm desperate to get everything back and up and running. We're losing the opportunity to do research. We got mass die-offs happening around us. Thousands of birds dying all around us. And we can't even get out and do research. We're so far behind. I'm just terrified we're going to lose the season. That'll be the first time in over a decade that we won't get any research in. It's not fair. The world deserves, the species deserves, but we're so far in the hole now, I don't know if we can crawl out of it without a huge donations. I can't see how, really. That's not the song we wanted. Let's try this again. Sonic, Dana Nasana, good night everybody. Timberwolf, Mundi, Diro, thank you. Victor, yeah, that's a good song, you're right. Diana, Sunshine, Wolf, hi Diana. Albert, Joe, Blochi, I apologize. James Lucid. Hi, James. Snakes and Doggies. Oh, Snakes and Doggies. Quick shout out to the comments section. Kevin Blanche. Chet Austin. Peaceware. Katja. Skillwilla. Colette, yes, hi Colette. John Curtis. Eileen Dover. Richard, good night everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Don't forget to give us a thumb up if you made it this far. We're going to come into the poll here in a minute. Darlene. We'll close up the poll. Johnson. John Shiflett. Good night, everybody. Bill Gates from hell. That's right, yeah. Thinker. Obsolete Optics. Lots of people commenting tonight. It was fun. Looking forward to reading the comments after. It takes me quite a while to switch off after the show's over, because you work all day, you got all the prep work done, you got to sit there and tell the story for several hours, and then you got to shut down the whole operation. I'm not able to do anything but work, right? I do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, year after year after year. I just wish more people would join in and curb stomp the nuclear industry. Just for my personal entertainment, of course. Conrad, good night, everybody. Appreciate you all running by, checking it out. Just almost down. We're going to go Timber Traveler. It's hard to appreciate how switched on I actually am for a lot of people that are not familiar with me. Thanks, Skawilla. Yeah, thanks, Sonic. Let's bring up the poll, close the poll out. I'll come and double check for comments that we missed. Are 1,000 plus nuclear fuel pools, constant radioactive emissions, an imminent threat to humanity? We got 97% of the people understood that this is evil, and I appreciate it. You got 58 votes. That's the right answer. Thank you so much, everybody. Once again, don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you... we must have been at it because the Geiger counter flopped on us, which means we're at it for At least 2 hours and 15 minutes. 2 hours and 24. That's the end of it. I'm going to close the poll. 97%. That's pretty awesome tonight. That's incredibly awesome. Chet Austin, thank you. I'm just going to scoop back up and see if I... Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. If there's anybody I might have missed, I'm just going to double check in the last couple of minutes, right? Looks like I got most people. I always seem to find one anyway when I read the comments later. Okay, well, there you go. Problem. We'll see everybody on tomorrow night. This was a 24-hour news cycle we covered tonight, by the way. It took almost 2.5 hours. Just to cover the lies from the last 24 hours. Took 2.5 hours. That's how crazy nuclear actually is. It took us 2.5 hours to cover the lies from the last 24-hour news cycle. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great day tomorrow, folks. Enjoy it while you can. God bless everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night, same time. And I'll have another full-packed show of lies to tell. Because the nuclear industry is predictable. They're going to lie all day tomorrow. And we're going to come out and try to challenge them. That's what we do. You have a great night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Take care, folks.